Greetings, everyone. I'm Clifford Bates, and welcome again once to our next session of reading Machiavelli's Prince. Today we're turning to chapter 16, which again continues on this question of what is the things that of a prince that are to be praised or blamed. In fact, just to remind you that 15, 16, 17, 18, and 19 as kind of a work theme, looking at the different virtues and vices that a prince and how they affect the prince and his character. Again, we're just to remind everyone that I'm reading from Leopold de Alvarez's translation, which of the Prince, available at Wavelin Publishing. There's a link to the publisher's thing below. Let us start. It's at page chapter 16 begins at page 96. Chapter 16 is composed of four paragraphs. The title of it is of Liberality and Parsimony. Now, parsimony means parsimony is being very careful with your money. Liberality is being very generous, giving. Okay, the idea was that the classics held that liberality, the liberal man, the free man, was one who was generous, one who was expected to be generous. Now, again, this is if we turn to Aristotle's Ethics, liberality was seen as a virtue at a certain kind of spending, whereas it's kind of a spending that deals with a kind of, low scale, whereas magnificence, big scale spending, was the virtue that was dealing with the grand things, grand gestures. Whereas from just day-to-day spending and how you do it, liberality was understood to be giving of the money. And remember, Aristotle's idea of virtue is this idea of a mean between excess and defect, where for Machiavelli, what he has here is, in other words, he doesn't concern about the mean in that sense. He still likes the word the mean, as he used it for the prudent archer who wants to hit the target. He aims high so he can get it, right? The idea that is not averaging conception mean. The mean in the classical understanding is an extreme. It is the perfect point. It is not an averaging. So Machiavelli does seem to accept the ancient understanding of virtue in this sense. He particularly embraces with his concept of virtua, the word he used translates for virtue to this text, is explicitly emulating the Roman model of virtue in the sense that the virtue is the manliness of a man. It is a man of action. The characters of a person or a man who has achieved ver. In the Latin, ver is the masculine. Okay, it's the masculine identification. So therefore, we have to understand this whole discussion here of liberality and parsimonyness is about how do you spend your money in private affairs, and that's really this is how you're spending the money of day-to-day things and things like here. So let us begin with the first paragraph. He says, "Let me begin then with the first of the qualities written above." So again, and again, if we turn to chapter 15 for a second, and remember the list of those things, and starting in this the second paragraph, right? He goes, the first things, and man applies. This is at the second paragraph, page 94. 94, the top paragraph of it, but the second paragraph of the chapter. It's in the second. It is the second sentence. He goes, and thus it is some are held liberal, right, and then some are miserable. Well, he does this, so we are confronted with him addressing the order. He is addressing the order of the thing I discussed first. So let's start the things I discussed first. Liberality. First things first, okay? So and he goes, I say that it would be good to be reputed to be liberal. Now notice this. He says it's good not to be liberal, but to be reputed. That means have the reputation of being liberal. Nevertheless, liberality used in such a mode that gains you reputation for it harms you. Because if you used it virtuously, and the mode that one ought to use it, it may not be recognized, for you will not escape the infamy of its opposite. Now, this is very interesting. De Alvarez here, again, he talks about the proper mention of liberality. It is two references. De Alvarez gives in footnote 2 on page 98. One is Nicomachean Ethics, where he talks about virtue. It's in the text 1119b 22 to 1122a 18. Right? That's the Aristotelian conception of what liberality means in the sense. It means giving people what they need. Okay, it's not necessarily liberality should be a sense of just generosity. It is to be giving, it's the willingness to give the person who needs something what they need, what they really need, in a sense. Not what they want, but what they need. And here's another thing about, he gives the discussion of Matthew, a reference, this is Alvarez, and I think he's right, Matthew 6, verses 2 and 4. About giving is not supposed to be bragging about it. You just give it to someone. It's you do it in quiet and you help them out. And this idea of the Christian liberality in a Christian context would be afraid of pride. Okay, the Christian idea would always fear that pride is the greatest sin. Remember, that's the sin that Lucifer, Satan, the brightest angel, the morning star. His fall is from pride. Okay, and therefore. It is seen as the highest sin in that sense. Thinking yourself above even God, or more. In other words, you have this sense of your virtue and your greatness. This is again very Christian. Christians now. Machiavelli Machiavelli seems to be more Roman in a sense and understand that pride is good. It's pride is what's wrong with excessive pride, or pride that you shouldn't, you're attributing pride when you shouldn't have it. But if you're appropriately attributing the amount of pride you should have, that's fine. In fact, in the Aristotelian concept of magnanimity, the magnanimous man is the man of virtue and excellence, that he knows he's virtue and excellent. He's not going to go around humbly about it. So this idea of therefore there's this tension here. And Machiavelli is very much playing on this Christian idea of virtue, the Christian idea of virtue, and therefore this can harm you. In other words, in the world where many people will believe this, in the world where Christian dogma is strong, and Christian opinions and Christian viewpoints are done, that perceived to be too proud, that could bring negatives in that sense, that it would be sinful in the eyes. And liberality in this sense, the true liberality doesn't. This is why he mentioned that line at the end of the sentence. If you use it as you should use it, right? If you liberality used in such a mode gauge you reputation for it, right? But that harms you, because if you used it virtuously and in the mode one ought to use it, it would not be recognized, and you would not escape the infamy of its opposite. In other words, the perception is, if you did virtue correctly in this Christian sense, of giving the people that they need, you not let everyone know you did it, what would happen is that you would be seen as not doing it, and you would have the reputation of being stingy, the opposite of liberal. Okay, This is the point he's trying to make. That in other words, if you do it, if you're liberal, really liberal, and you make a show out of it, then people will think you're proud, you're arrogant, you're showing off. That's how it harms you in that sense. That's where being the giver harms you in that sense. That's one sense, in a sense. Now, he goes and continues. And you will not be recognized, and you will not escape the infamy of its opposite, as being stingy, right? For if one wishes to maintain the name of liberal among men, it is necessary that one not omit any quality of sumptuousness, to such an extent that a prince so disposed will consume all his faculties in such like works, and he will finally be necessitated in his wish to maintain the name of liberal, to burden the people extraordinarily, to become extracting, and to do all those things that can be done to get money. In other words, if you're trying to keep the reputation of being, spending, you're going to eventually spend everything you have, and therefore you're going to start needing to get money again, and you're going to have to get money by taxing the people. And you have to remember, this is another thing. This is to understand why, what's going on. We talked about it before, that princes, the Pope used, and particularly starting with Alexander, but Alexander then Julius and then Leo and other popes used things like indulgences and selling of offices as a means to raise money. He did this to pay for his endeavors, his ability to maintain the wealth. Leo did it more to just produce these great, magnificent things. But in doing so, this is another thing. He had to engage in these activities that would defy the church in that sense. Now, I'm bringing that example here because this is a case, what he's saying, the danger of liberality in this sense. The danger of liberality, and even though the idea of this is not liberality in the normal sense, but liberality in the grander sense, okay? What Leo did, he wanted to create the big Sistine Chapel to show the grandeur and greatness of the church. This is more, in the classical sense, magnificence, not liberality. But Machiavelli is kind of condensing both of these. This is about giving. Spending yours, giving away yours, giving things to people that are yours. And then soon later, in order to have more to give to others, you have to take from others, usually the people. And you usually by this word here is because why? Because you cannot, if you want to maintain the idea that you're being a giver, a liberal person, you have to, given human beings cannot omit, as he says, any quality of sumptuousness. In other words, people are going to expect, oh no, it has to be better, it has to be nicer. So the expectation of in other words, people will increase their expectation of you. And if you don't live up to the expectation, you're stingy. It becomes like you get no benefit from it. Okay, and this is Machiavelli's point here, right? And he says what? He says faculties that such like works, and it'll be necessitated if he wishes to maintain the name of liberal to burden the people extraordinarily. Okay, extraordinarily, with what? To become extracting, taking extraction money, extracting wealth and resources away from the people that you rule over. Okay, and what happens is to do all those things that can be done to get money. End of sentence. Next, this will begin to make him hateful to his subjects, and as he become poor, none of them will respect him. So first of all, you become hated. And as you become poor, then they not only hate you, they no longer respect you. Okay, and what happens? Semicolon, and continue. And in such a mode, having harmed the many with this his liberality, and rewarded the few, he will feel every mischance which first arises, and he will be endangered by every danger which appears. In other words, you can't benefit everyone. The problem with liberality is you end up benefiting few, not many. And what happens here? well, you spend so much, you become poor. Now, in order to keep on benefiting those who you're benefiting, you're going to have to use extraordinary means to get money, usually from the people, which make them hated. But as you keep on spending your money, become poorer and poorer, this makes you not only hated, but not respected. And what happens is you're not respected either by the poor or the many. The many that you're giving these things to then don't respect you either. And that's going to make you very vulnerable, Machiavelli says here. Very vulnerable in that sense. And and he will feel every mischance which first arises. And he will be endangered by every danger that appears. In the last sentence of the first paragraph, coming to know this and wishing to draw back, he will immediately incur the infamy of stinginess. So what happens is that you try to do one. In other words, you're going to automatically be considered a stingy person, because once you realize, okay, maybe it's not a good idea to keep on spending because I'm going to have to tax the people, and that's bad, and maybe that's going to cause problems. So I'm not going to stop spending, and the minute I stop spending, I am stingy. Okay, so you get nothing, no real benefit, only costs, only negative things. Second paragraph. Since a prince therefore cannot use this virtue of liberality in such a mode as to become known for it without harm, he ought not, if he's prudent, care about the name of stinginess, for in time he will always be held to be most liberal, since his patrimony will make his income suffice. He can then defend himself from whomever makes war on him. He can undertake enterprises without burdening the people, such that he may be liberal to everyone from whom he takes nothing. And these are infinite in number. And he will be stingy with all those whom he does not give. And these will be the few. In other words, okay, and this is very interesting now. He's going to be liberal by not taking things by being stingy. This is a very opposite of you thinking. By living within your means, being parsimonious with your resources, and being careful. Let you enjoy being stingy, in this sense. Why? Because you're able to provide have the resources, maintain the resources that you're able to what? Defend your state. He can defend himself, whoever makes war on him, and can undertake enterprises without burdening the people. Okay, great enterprises. If you burden the people too much, they'll bolt. This is why Lyndon Johnson masked the cost of Vietnam, because if the cost of Vietnam was known, he would much of his social programs there'll be a choice. You want to do your programs, or you want to continue Vietnam War. So he hid the cost of the Vietnam War in order to mask that there was something that was going to force a choice. A choice for the American economy. We constantly do this. Politicians often try not to make choices of cost of their endeavor. If they make the endeavor too known, and it's going to be burdensome, then the unlike people will not, no matter how wonderful it is. Remember, this is a new modern order. Like an enterprise, until you taste it, you don't always benefit from it. So therefore, this is the problem here. So therefore, it's better to do it within your means and not excessively burden the people. In other words, he goes there and he says what? He says okay, but then again, because he's not going to be taking anything, because he will take nothing, and these are infinite in number. In other words, because he's not taking anything from everyone, the many who are not being taxed will look at him as liberal. This is the irony. By him doing nothing, by him not spending, But this, by not spending, he is not taking from them. You see that? And because it's the many who will feel the problem, and therefore the many will have this expectation. Now, whom you give things to are always few. So he's playing on the few and the many here. The few will be the ones who you usually are the recipients of liberality, of the prince's liberality. And therefore, the few will get it at the expense of the many. See? So therefore, if by being stingy, the few don't get it and they resent it, but they're few, not many. Remember what he said about the problem of the many and the few, the great and the people. It's always safer to have the people on your side. The many are dangerous, but they can be countered. If you don't have the people on your side, you're screwed. You're SOL, as we say, shit out of luck. So let's continue here for a second. He continues, and he says, and those he does not give, and these will be few. And in our times, we have seen great things done only by those reputed to be stingy. All the others have been extinguished. In other words, Pope Julius II, although he served the name of liberality in order to attain the papacy, never thought afterwards of maintaining that name so that he would be able to make war. The present King of France has waged many wars without levying an ordinary tax on his own people. And this was possible only because of his extra expenses were covered by his long practiced parsimony. So in other words, Julius, although he used liberality to get in power as Pope, to become the Pope, but once in Pope, in order to do his things, he never played liberality. Liberality never interfered with his strategy and his policy. He didn't want to maintain it. He'd rather be stingy, get a bad reputation, no longer being generous and giving, because it would interfere with his ability to do what he wanted. In the case of this French king, the French king has been able not to wage large wars in places, and not impose costs on his people, levy taxes on the French, and thereby this was only possible by his parsimony and living within his expenses and his extreme parsimony. So, and he continues, the present King of Spain would not have undertaken or won so many enterprises if he had been reputed to be liberal. In other words, Ferdinand the great conqueror, Ferdinand the Catholic, Ferdinand the man who unifies Spain, helps intercedes into the French affairs. Intercedes into the Italian affairs, right? Ferdinand, he would not have been able to achieve as many enterprises that he has if he was reputed to be liberal. Okay, now the next. A prince, therefore, ought to little esteem, not in order to rob his subjects, in order to be able to defend himself, in order not to become poor and despised, in order not to be forced to become rapacious, incurring the name of stinginess. In other words, don't worry. In other words, the name of stinginess, semicolon, because this is one of those vices which enables him to reign. In other words, stinginess is a vice, but it enables you to reign. So don't worry if you get it. In other words, a prince ought to little esteem why? Because he doesn't, in order not to have to rob his subjects, he's going to, in order to be able to defend himself, in other words, have the resources to defend himself, in order not to become poor and despised, in order not to become forced to rapacious, incurring the name of incurring names. So there's four things he said. A prince should not little esteem. What? These are the four conditions. And one, in order not to have to rob his subjects. Two, 2, in order to be able to defend oneself. 3, in order not to become poor and despised. 4, which kind of repeats the first one, in order not to be forced to become rapacious. Okay. He ought to incur the name of stinginess, because this is one of those vices that enables him to reign. And if someone were to say, Caesar with his liberality obtained the imperium, and many others, by being and by having been to be held to be liberal, have attained to very great rank, I respond, either you have already become a prince, or you are on the way to acquiring that rank. In the first case, liberality is harmful. In the second, it is very very necessary to be reputed liberal, period. Caesar was one of those who wished to obtain the principate in Rome. But after he had arrived there, had he survived and not tempered his spending, he would have destroyed that imperium. Now, this is a very important footnote here. In other words, his rule, his reign. It's about discourses, seeing the discourses about Caesar. It's not important. It is good to always look at the footnotes in that sense. He'll continue the next sentence after that. And if someone were to reply that many have been princes who have been reputed to be extremely liberal, and yet they have done great things with their armies, I respond to you as follows. In other words, again, this is people say this, and he gives a response. The first one, the example of Caesar and those like him who get power. He says, if you're not already a prince, if you're already a prince, liberality is destructive to you. If you're not a prince and you want to become a prince, having the perception of being liberal is very important, because it helps you get in. Okay. It'll be a very useful tool to get power. Liberality is good, but once you're in, you gotta no longer do it, because if you do it, it'll ruin you. Okay. Now he continues. Now this is that line. He says, but he gives the line of someone says they'll be extremely liberal, doing great things with their armies. Now I respond to you: either a prince spends his own, and that is of his subject, or he spends that which belongs to other. So, two conditions: he spends his own and those that belongs to his subjects, or he spends that belongs to others, not his subjects. Foreigners, people you're conquering, people. In the first case, he says, he ought to be frugal. So regarding your own money and the subjects' money and their property and their resources, you should be frugal. Semicolon. In the others, one ought not to omit any part of liberality. In other words, this is why this idea. There's always this perception among gangsters and people like that. They're very generous. They give things away. Well, it's very easy to give things away when it's other people's stuff. And in fact, criminal peoples, the real criminals, need to be liberal, because they would not be tolerated otherwise. This is how they make themselves tolerated. In other words, the really criminal types, the really criminals, use liberality as a way to mask their crime, or make the many and others forget what they're doing. So this is the point about this, that a good ruler it needs to care about the resources and not get the people. And if you're engaged in a situation where you're waging war and you can take resources of others for that, you have to be liberal then. The liberal with what you get. When you're a general conquering the areas, you need to ensure that the soldiers be loyal to you. So therefore, you let them take stuff. Not everything just goes to the general's pocket. Okay, and of course, in the modern warfare, we don't do that anymore. This is frowned upon. But the reality of ancient history and onwards was that people did. That's how the generals used to pay for their wars, by winning things and conquering things. So again, if it's your subject's money and your money, be frugal. If it's other people's money, ought not. You read, he ought not to omit any part of liberality. Be very giving. Caesar is a good example in that sense. Last paragraph. And for the prince who with his armies and for the prince whose armies live on plunder, sack, and ransom, who handles what belongs to others, it is necessary that he exercises liberality. Otherwise, he will not be followed by his soldiers. In other words, your army's living on plunder. In other words, you're living on plunder, sack, and that. You need to be very liberal, okay? If you're not, then the soldier's not going to follow you. And of that which does not belong to you or your subjects, you can be a very great giver, as were Cyrus, Caesar, and Alexander. For the spending of what belongs to others does not take away from your reputation, but adds to it. Okay? In other words, Cyrus, Caesar, and Alexander, they were generous. They gave. Why? Because they gave what they conquered. They conquered much. They conquered lots. Cyrus and Alexander conquers the Persian Empire. Caesar's a little less. Caesar only conquers Gaul, but that was a lot of money. That was significant wealth at that time, in terms of slaves, in terms of resources. It provided a vast sum of wealth. And this helped him get power in that sense. Now, if you're going to take by this way, you need. So it goes, and for spending what belongs to others does not take away from your reputation. It adds to it. In this case, others, not your citizens, others. And there is nothing that consumes itself so much as liberality, for you lose the faculty of using it. You lose the faculty for using it all the while that you use it, and become either poor or despised, or to avoid poverty, rapacious and hatred. So in other words, liberality, if you're doing it right, it doesn't. He says that's what it's. The more you try to use it, the less you can use it. Because why? Because if you use it, in other words, you spend. It means less resources. You have less and less resources. Therefore, you can be less and less liberal. And if you want to keep liberality, you need to what? If you become poorer, and by being poorer, again, remember what he says, your people start your respect declines. And then what happens? You start taking, you become hated. Okay, so the more you try to keep spending, the more you'll become. By taking, you'll become hated more. Okay, so therefore, it's a trying to maintain liberality is a bad choice. He says here. And above all things, a prince ought to God about being despised and hated. Liberality conducts you to one or the other. In other words, this is a great line in that sense. A prince should always avoid trying to be despised and hated. And liberality conducts you to one or the other, period. I think the next sentence is the last sentence of the paragraph. Therefore, it is far wiser to have the name of stinginess, which begets an infamy without hatred. In other words, it's an infamy, but it's an infamy without hatred, rather than to be necessitated by wanting the name of liberal, to incur the name of rapacious, which begets an infamy with hatred. An infamy with hatred. In other words, the rapacious people are really hated. It's infamous. You're infamous and you're hated with hatred. Okay? In other words, he's saying the danger of being liberal is being stingy. Okay, it's a bad, people may not think well of you, but you're not hated at least. Okay? You avoid hatred. and you avoid becoming rapacious. Okay, you avoid something really bad. And that, by rapacious, you'll become infamy, not greatness, infamy. I know we live in a world we'd say, oh, but anything is good. The infamous and we say, oh, Hitler is Stalin is, great people because these people are powerful, and these, this conception that there's no distinction between the great and the infamous. Hitler and Stalin aren't great. Lenin aren't great. These are monsters. Okay, Mao, monster. You might have to deal with monsters. You might have to treat them somewhat well in order to keep peace in the world. But you don't call them great. You don't look at them as great in that sense. This is an error. Now, of course, I think in the popular world, the misconception is that the relativism is everywhere in the modern world in this sense. We don't really distinguish. And in fact, this is why any talk, any reputation, bad comments will be as much positive for people. Because if people hate you, well, who's hating you? And if people don't like them, therefore, maybe I should read this person, right? This is kind of like we have knee-jerk reactions in politics and life today. Really stupid ones, I think. The enemy of our enemy must be our friend, which is not necessarily the case. It might tactically be, but may not really be, okay? Like the Americans and Stalin, the Americans and the Soviets weren't really allies. They were tactical bedfellows against the Nazis. But they really wanted completely different things. They were really opposed. In other words, in many ways, Hitler and Stalin had more in common to their hostility towards the Western democratic capitalist world, but they also disagreed. In other words, therefore, you can tactically make agreements, but we shouldn't confuse a tactical choice for real friendship or real similarity or shared values. Okay. And this is the point that he's trying to warn us about here, about paying attention to the virtue and vices. And liberality is a case where you think it's good, but no, it's not. Well, with that, we end this chapter, and it's a little short. We're 30 minutes, and I'm a little shorter than normal. So good. I didn't want to go too long. Again, if you have any comments, please put them below. If you like this video, please like and share with a friend. You can, if you want to see more of these things, you can subscribe and recommend to subscribe to friends also. Again, if you want to follow me on social media, again, things are below. Again, I wish you all a nice day. Take care. Bye-bye.